say it's lit, right? Lit, lit, lit.
Uhuru comrades, and welcome to today's Omali Taught Me Sunday Study, live with the leader of the African nation, Chairman Omali Yeshitela. The theme of our discussion today is the history and role of the Proletarian Party of the Black working class. Chairman Omali Yeshitela will guide us through the similarly titled document, which was written and published in the Burning Spear newspaper in 1985. As the state of the world comes into sharper view, redefined by the colonized, the question and significance of an African working class-led political party has achieved greater clarity. For the last 50 years, the African People's Socialist Party has served as the advanced attachment of the African working class, which helps us to further understand why on July 29th of this year, the FBI facilitated violent, simultaneous pre-dawn raids against our party and its leadership, Chairman Omali Yeshitela. Comrades, the time to study and understand these critical questions is right now. We must grasp our own significance as members or supporters of the African People's Socialist Party, the broader Uhuru movement, and the worldwide anti-colonial struggle that's unfolding. With this lesson, we will get clear on the origin of political parties and the necessity for one such as the African People's Socialist Party. We'll start with the reading from the chairman, then break for announcements before going into question and answers. You can access the study materials in the Facebook or YouTube descriptions. And last thing, before we start, make sure you're hitting that like, that follow, subscribe, and/or share button to do your part in getting the word out about this study. Without further ado, I am honored to introduce the founder of the African People's Socialist Party, the leader of the African nation, and the worldwide African Revolution, Chairman Omali Yeshitela. Uhuru, Chairman.
Uhuru, thank you so much, Comrade Director Akile, for introducing this study on today. And I want to unite with what you've said about the significance of this study. And also the fact that this study originated as article in the Burning Spear of 1985. I want to send a shout out to Comrade Redbeard. Redbeard, I just received when I arrived at the Uhuru House here in St. Louis an hour or so ago, a big box awaiting me with copies of the Burning Spear. I think almost every issue of the Burning Spear with one or two editions and copies. And I felt that was extremely important. And it's important to you too, Comrade Director Akile. I know that our archives are essentially based there in St. Petersburg. I think it would be good to begin the process of archiving some of the Burning Spear newspapers here. And you may also consider looking at the archives to see if there are any missing there in St. Petersburg, Florida. that may have been sent to me by Redbeard. Thank you again, Comrade Redbeard, one of the faithful supporters, followers of the party. And so thank you. So we're going to have this discussion around the issue of political parties. And in some ways, this is an unusual kind of study because people more or less take for granted an understanding of what political parties are, or take for granted their existence. And like air, not something that's necessary to understand, it's just there, and political parties are just there. And so we don't know that much about political parties really. And even those of us who participate in political parties, generally speaking, don't know. And certainly the rulers of the colonial capitalist system have never really had an interest in explaining political parties in a way that people could see that interest connected to political parties. But we are the African People's Socialist Party, a revolutionary organization of the African working class. And it is precisely because there is a presumption on our part of the critical significance role of the African working class in changing history, making history, and the responsibility of the class to capture and wield political power. And we have concluded that the political party is the best instrument through which such attainment and exercise of political power can occur. It's extremely important for the working class to look at and examine the question of political parties because for what it is we are attempting to do, we cannot be successful without a real conscious participation and understanding by at least a critical sector of the class itself that has to be mobilized and to mobilize to seize and wield political power. So that's why we're having this discussion. It's a critical discussion that has to occur. And July 29th, the attack by the United States colonial government on the African People's Socialist Party is something that makes such an understanding extremely important to us in the African People's Socialist Party. Our work, and we have talked about the various institutions that we have created, and we'll say some things moving forward about that. But our work is, the success of our work is based on the ability to bring elements of the African working class, the most oppressed, downtrodden, despised, spat upon, slandered sector of the African population has to lead. And this is not easy, the work that we do. But when we look at what we have built in various places throughout the world and what we are building, you see that it requires the leadership and actual participation of the working class. And this is one of the reasons we're a relatively small party. So we want to talk about how the working class comes to power, and the political party is the basis for that discussion. I want to also say that the colonized working class must be clear on this question because its success requires an informed, dynamic relationship between the class, as I say, between the working class and the party that it presumes to lead. Part of what will distinguish this discussion is a forceful introduction of colonialism as a mode of production, the colonial mode of production. While much of this discussion may sound familiar in that it uses phrases like capitalism and colonialism, it is the colonial mode of production that forces onto the discussion questions that have heretofore lain dormant, not been expressed in the past. And also, I want to say that this was written in 1985, and so there's an element here, outdated definition of African internationalism. We characterize African internationalism as the highest expression Pan-Africanism during the period of imperialism and crisis. And as you can see, even though we use this definition, the definition of African internationalism is the highest expression of Pan-Africanism or Pan-Africanism during the period of imperialism. It is at the same time a kind of criticism of Pan-Africanism and what we perceived even at that time as its limitations. I'm going to move forward now with reading this, and everyone should have a copy of this. You have access to this. So the history and role of the Proletarian Party of the Black working class. This is reprinted from the June 1985 issue of the Burning Spear. And we read, political parties have not always existed in human society. Indeed, they represent a rather new, one might say, modern feature of human society. They emerged with the development of capitalism in Europe, where there was a growing bourgeois-defined assumption of democracy that was rooted in the ascendancy of the bourgeoisie to power. So in Europe, there was a point where European society made a fundamental transformation, where prior to the rise of what is characterized as the bourgeoisie, which we've come to recognize as capitalist ruling class, prior to then, the mode of production was feudalism, and there was a feudal leadership. The leadership in society revolved around the nobility, around the landlords, landowners, and things like that. And the fundamental distinction in that society was that which existed between the landowners, the landlords, and the peasants, and those who worked on the land owned by the landlord and were only paid partially. And there were very few rights that the people had. We had the divine right of kings is what informed the relationship in society. Philosophically, there was this assumption that the king, the nobility had all the rights, and they were conferred upon them by God. They were divine rights. And so, as you can see, there's not much wiggle room. There's not much space for presumptions of democracy under such circumstances or the participation of the people as equals. So what we're talking about is this change. And so this whole modern feature of human society, as we say, emerged with the development of capitalism in Europe, where there was a growing bourgeois-defined assumption of democracy that was rooted in the ascendancy of the bourgeoisie to power. And the bourgeoisie was that class, that social force that replaced in Europe the nobility, the leadership of the landlords and what have you, and represented a transformation, an entire political and economic transformation inside Europe, where one mode of production, the feudal mode of production, was being overthrown. So the existence of political parties is recognition of class contradictions in society and the role of political organization of the people as a means of acquiring and keeping political power. Of course, this is something that allows for people who examine what they call capitalism and to discover this great democratic advancement from feudalism, because now with this, because in many ways capitalism was a profoundly successful criticism of feudalism, the divine right of kings, and where people were locked to the land with no ability to advance in society. The children were born into circumstances that they would be generally locked into forever. And there were other kinds of cruel and crushing social and political and economic features that defined that relationship. For African people, both on the continent and of Africa and elsewhere, political parties are even more recent. This is because the European bourgeoisie came to power in Europe off the slave trade in Africa. And so even as it was promoting democracy for itself in Europe, it used every available resource to immobilize and disorganize the African. Hence, class contradictions within Africa never reached a level and sharpness of Europe, except as an extension of the power of the emerging European bourgeoisie in the form of African slave catchers, et cetera. And we can see the whole neo-colonial setup is an extension of the power of the European bourgeoisie. This is the bourgeoisie, this new force in Europe coming to power, overturning where feudalism is being overturned, and this new social force now comes into existence that we call the bourgeoisie, this new ruling class. And it did so in part as a consequence of being able to capture and win through force or otherwise the participation of a certain minority sector of the African population as slave catchers to capture other African people. This was an introduction of a contradiction, the class contradictions emerging in the whole social system into Africa itself. And so hence class contradictions within Africa never reached a level and sharpness of Europe except as an extension of the power of the emerging European bourgeoisie in the form of African slave catchers, et cetera. For Africans then, the external enemy became such a dominant force that it served to unite the broadest sector of our community as one oppressed community while muting or making secondary the contradictions within our community. Within the US, the state of affairs was generally summed up as the white people against the Black people, when by some chance there was a white individual who acted differently, who did something that apparently supported the demands of Black people, or when there was an African who betrayed the demands of Black people or our movement, our people would generally sum this up as due to the personal qualities of the individuals involved. This was a so-called good white man, or bad, or so-called Uncle Tom Black man. The features of class began to achieve definition as early as the first quarter of this century being, of course, the 20th century. The Garvey-Du Bois controversy and the communist articulation of the African Blood Brotherhood are examples. But it was only in the 60s that the actual objective conditions emerged sharply enough for the class contradictions to become consolidated within our oppressed, colonized community and to achieve a solid foundation upon a material base. This is because the movement of the 60s had as an immediate influence the concrete material developments of the 1950s. It was during the 50s that the alliance between our movement and the liberal bourgeoisie consolidated itself in mass struggle and achieved a revolutionary character. It activated the African victims of US colonialism as conscious participants, impacted on the consciousness and practical life of all the peoples within the US, and it overthrew the immediate form of capitalist rule of a sector of the white ruling class in the South and achieved legal democratic rights for African people. So you can see how this would have made a profound difference in how we understood and approached and experienced contradiction and struggle. This struggle came to sharp, definitive political life in the South of the United States in the 50s. And by the way, you will see a parallel development occurring in other places within the colonial mode of production, which was universal. And we did not know how to articulate this as effectively in 1985 when this was written as we are able now. But this struggle came to sharp, definitive political life in the South of the United States in the 50s because of the convergence of two important factors. One of these factors was subjective and the other objective. The subjective factor was the longing by colonially oppressed Africans for freedom from foreign rule, for dignity, and for a better life without brutality and material want. The objective factor was the tremendous growth in the production capacity that followed the Second Imperialist War to redivide the world between capitalist powers. The war resulted in the United States becoming the world's greatest power and the possessor, either directly or indirectly, of the colonial raw materials which were previously held exclusively by European powers. And right now we're only mentioning raw materials, but it was more than that. It was human resources too. It was intellectual materials. It was the fact is that the whole slave and colonial process resulted in the theft of technology that was transferred from African and indigenous peoples from around the world into Europe. So this growth in production capacity multiplied the need for industrial workers almost overnight. These workers could only be found in the South among the African toilers who were trapped in an economic form of capitalist system which was labor intensive and required the most oppressive and backward political methods for its maintenance. And when we talk about labor intensive, we're talking about the stuff that when I was a young person helped to define how we understood our relationship to this country as being subject to the most significant backbreaking kind of labor. We are the ones who plowed the earth, who grew all of the food and dug the holes and laid the railroad tracks and created roads and just open up areas for development that for foreign development and exploitation that did not exist before. So it was the struggle to acquire these workers. It's absolutely necessary for capitalist expansion and imperialist economic development that led one sector of the white ruling class to support and encourage the Black movement of the South against the particular form of capitalist rule then prevailing in the South, that is the labor intensive. And because it was a struggle against a particular form of capitalist rule and not capitalism itself, because of the strategic location of the Black petty bourgeoisie, which was only interested in partial revolution, the alliance between our movement and the liberal white ruling class consolidated the leadership of the Black petty bourgeoisie over our movement. So I'm hoping that that notes are being taken and people will be able to intervene in this discussion with questions and other interventions that can contribute to making this a meaningful kind of study on today. So the African proletariat was born, but the outcome of this alliance was something that neither the liberal bourgeoisie nor the Black petty bourgeoisie could clearly anticipate, namely the emergence of an African proletariat right in the bowels of America itself. When we talk about proletariat, we're talking about a working class. And of course, now we're using the term working class as defined by a kind of European experience that did not include all the toilers of the world. In fact, it was something that defined a certain kind of development in Europe from feudalism when people were toilers as such and tied to the land and could not move to another form of exploitation of labor where the toilers had been, at least theoretically, that is in Europe, freed from the land and pushed into a situation of being able to go out into the world and sell the value of their labor power to the highest bidder. And so this proletariat rapidly became, that is to say, African proletariat. This is the working class that we are talking about. This is the working class where we use the term proletariat to define working class as it has come to be understood from the European experience, essentially. So this proletariat rapidly became conscious of aims which were not only in contradiction to the aims of colonial white power, but were increasingly being revealed as in contradiction to the aims of the colonized liberal Black petty bourgeoisie. And as these contradictions and aims began to crystallize, so did contradictions in ideology and tactics begin to crystallize. The generally, though inconsistently materialist philosophy of Black nationalism began to challenge the idealist and obscurantist philosophy of the liberal Black petty bourgeoisie. And see, because Black nationalism allowed for the assumption of the rise of an African nation state, something dreams, etc., discouraged, that the dreams and idealism of the African petty bourgeoisie discouraged, the notion that somehow there can be something called freedom that was founded on the basis of the colonial exploitation and oppression of the African nation itself. So there was this freedom, which was the dreams of that, we, usually, defer to Martin Luther King's speech of "I had a dream" and et cetera. That obviously was quite fanciful in terms of it did not suggest that the African working class, our African people ourselves, had to do anything to attain this freedom except to dream of a better day. So the dream of a better day in America was a consequence of the moral regeneration of whites, of the oppressor nation. And this was challenged by the nightmare of the US objective reality, the material reality, and the demand for Black power to determine our own Black destiny. The liberal philosophy of nonviolence, a philosophy necessary for the support of liberal white ruling class, met its fate in the same flames of Black rebellion that consumed city after city as the first full-fledged generation of Black proletariat came to political life as colonized workers becoming conscious, if barely so, of its separate class interests, and it is separate from the class interests of the African petty bourgeoisie. It was during and subsequent to this period that we began to see the emergence of revolutionary Black parties. It was during and subsequent to this period that we began to understand the nature of political parties, not as simply associations of people who have the same general belief, but as repositories of particular class interests, as class parties, as the political instruments of particular classes, as the projectors and protectors of the will and interests of particular classes, as the concentration and concretization in political form of the economic interests of particular classes. So fundamental class interests, political parties are organizations of the most advanced representatives of a particular class. The task of political parties are directly tied to the material interests of the classes they represent. Sometimes elements of a particular class are not even aware of their own class interests. Sometimes elements of the capitalist, colonialist, white ruling class, for example, are drunks or drug addicts or even insane, as a member of the Kennedy family, and as was the notorious Howard Hughes. Sometimes elements of the ruling class are wife beaters, bedwetters, or lazy ignoramuses who are unconcerned and disdainful of the interests of the capitalist, colonialist ruling class. However, it is the advanced elements and representatives of the colonial capitalist ruling class, organized in political parties, which look out for the political interests of the interests overall of the capitalist colonialist ruling class, organized in political parties, which look out for the interests of the entire class. This includes the interests of the drunks, the wife beaters, etc. It is this fact which makes them the advanced elements, the activist element. What then are the interests of the US colonial capitalist class? The most fundamental interest of the colonial capitalist ruling class is the perpetuation of the capitalist system itself and itself as a ruling class. That is to say, the most fundamental interest of the colonial capitalist ruling class is the perpetuation of the capitalist system itself and of itself as the ruling class. This is really important to understand because sometimes people can't understand why a particular clearly a sector of the ruling class with specific kinds of interests at any given time will often find itself capable of supporting the system despite the fact that its own interests may not dominate at that particular time. So the fact is that the interests of the ruling class, the colonial capitalist ruling class, is the perpetuation of the system, and that's one aspect of it. The other aspect is the perpetuation of itself as the ruling class, and this fundamental interest gives rise to other interests. Economically, it gives rise to the interest of the elimination of all economic competition, both domestically and internationally. The interest of dominating the natural resources and markets of the entire world. Politically, it gives rise to an interest in restricting the political liberties of the peoples of the entire world, and interest in crushing any political liberties which do not facilitate the economic domination of the US capitalists, and which might lead to the development of an independent political expression which would challenge the hegemony of US capitalism. Economically, politically, ideologically, it gives rise to an interest in idealism and obscurantism, in keeping the oppressed and exploited peoples, especially the Black working class, separated from an understanding of their own material interests, in keeping the oppressed and exploited peoples ignorant of science and a scientific approach to an examination of contradictions of class exploitation and national oppression. Ideologically, it gives rise to the interest in ideological imperialism, the imperialist domination of ideology that is consistent with the economic domination of the capitalist social system. During the 60s, when Black political parties began to emerge among the colonized African people, it was because the pressures of class contradictions among the colonially oppressed peoples ourselves began to crystallize and reveal a colonial society that was much more complex than before. Before the achievement of legal democratic rights, it was all of us, that is to say, Blacks, against them, that is to say, whites. The US government itself was not generally recognized as an agent of a particular class and social system. And our movement under the leadership of the Black petty bourgeoisie courted the various US presidents as assiduously hoping to find a good one who was sympathetic to the general democratic aims and demands of the movement. I am kind of sort of familiar with a noted kind of, I think they characterize themselves as Black leftists, who has written a book on US presidents. And part of what that book appears to attempt to do is define the value of US presidents based on their level of quote unquote racism as it's characterized versus each other. So what we're saying that this is, part of the whole tendency about the Black petty bourgeoisie moving toward the various US presidents, hoping to find a good one. And in fact, beyond that, the Communist Party USA had once developed a congressional strategy that presupposed success and a movement in the interest of the people by aligning itself with what it characterized as the progressive sector of the Democratic Party in the US Congress. But with the achievement of legal democratic rights by a movement which was winning its own concessions in a decade of the most vicious struggle, the basic aspirations of the Black petty bourgeoisie, which was growing due to the effectiveness of the movement and the intervention of the liberal white bourgeoisie, were realized. So the African petty bourgeoisie realized its basic aspirations. And this is off the struggles of African people and its alignment with sectors of the liberal white bourgeoisie, the colonizer. And this, takes us back to what we said earlier on in terms of class struggle being introduced into the African community, as we've come to understand, to the African nation, due to the intervention of the colonizer into our affairs, as sometimes as hiring slave catchers and of course, what we know as the African neo-colonial petty bourgeoisie, et cetera. However, this decade of struggle had also thrust a new generation of fully mobilized Black workers into the scene as the main social factor in the US North American political life. The aspirations of the workers were not realized by the achievement of legal democratic rights. The attempts to moderate the Black liberation movement, to decelerate it and direct it toward liberal bourgeois democratic sops, were met with the cries of "Burn, baby, burn" in Los Angeles and Black Power in Mississippi. And the crystallization of the different aspirations embraced by different social elements within our movement gave fuel to a movement to build independent political parties among the colonial oppressed African population. So these crystallization of the aspirations embraced by different social elements, the African peasant bourgeoisie, the African working class, it fueled a movement to build independent political parties that among the colonially oppressed African population. The African working, certainly anti-colonial sector of the population began to define its interests differently from that of the liberal African petty bourgeoisie. But also, although it was a pressure of class contradictions within our colonized society, which gave birth to the party building movement, our experience in this arena, our inexperience in this area frustrated our efforts, and more often than not, we were unable to build parties which clearly identified the class interests they served. And the relationship, the interests of this particular class had to overthrow the colonial oppression of our whole people. What did happen immediately was the creation of certain party formations, which were capable of raising various principles of unity, which went beyond the limitations of the liberal Black petty bourgeoisie in the struggle against US domestic colonial oppression of our whole people. Those who could unite with the militant anti-colonial principles, which clearly distinguished themselves, which clearly distinguished them from the liberal Black petty bourgeoisie, associated themselves into the same party and were able to characterize themselves as revolutionaries or ambiguously as Black nationalists. Those sectors of the movement which were trapped inside the limitations of reform under US colonialism were characterized as Uncle Toms and sometimes as Black bourgeoisie. In any event, none of these parties was capable of raising up the interests of the Black working class as the hegemonic interests of the party. Although it was the pressure of the Black working class resistance and struggle which was pushing this party building process forward. It was essentially petty bourgeois nationalists, often revolutionary, who were leading this effort. The Black working class was yet to seize hegemony of its own revolutionary movement, although history was pushing events in that direction with growing urgency. So we see the Black Panther Party, the first Black Workers' Party, and the emergence of the Black Panther Party in 1966-67 came closest to being that party. It represented the first time in the history of our movement that a Black political party had identified itself as a socialist or communist organization with communist or socialist revolutionary objectives. Inherent in this declaration is the assumption of a worldview with the interests of the Black working class as its center. Certainly the vast bulk of its membership was working class, and its 10-point program and platform raised what were fundamentally working class demands. But the Black Panther Party, although it gave the colonially oppressed Black working class more experience in leading its own struggle than any organization before it, muddled its own effectiveness with an ideology which mystified the character of the Black working class under colonialism by identifying unemployed Black workers who had lumpen proletarian tendencies as the lumpen proletariat, thereby raising up conceptually a non-working class element as the leadership of the revolution. And I just want to say a couple of things about that, because we use terms like lumpen proletariat. We've talked about how the proletariat, we looking at the workers, the toilers, or the producers. And then there's this concept of lumpen proletariat that came out of Europe, And this lumpen proletariat is exactly what it sounds like. It's just this entity that was there, that was not the working class as such. In fact, generally speaking, it had often forgotten how to be workers, and it lived through hustling, and there were entire areas of Europe in cities in what came to be Europe where these groups lived and thrived outside of the process of normal production within the social system itself. And this lumpen group, it had certain kinds of characteristics that we can look at because it was not tied to the process of production. It was short-sighted. It could not have the long view. It lived, from moment to moment. It was capable of and often participated as informants and snitches and things like that, because to function as the lumpen, which also meant pickpockets and pimps and prostitutes and people who live sort of outside of the law, they had to have a certain kind of coexistence with the police, with the state, in order to be successful. So the state, in many instances, tolerated them. That's why you will see in various places where we live as African people in our oppressed communities, people who engaged in activities outside of the law, the productive process, pimps, prostitutes, thieves, and things like that, who are known to be these things in the African community. You often see them when the police are there with their heads in the police car, confirmed with the police, et cetera, because they have to have this kind of relationship in order to exist. And the police tolerate them, the state tolerates them. And so when the Black Panther, but they are extraordinary, effective street fighters. And so like in virtually every rebellion that's ever happened, you would see the lumpen out. They are the ones who you often would see with the Molotov cocktails and actually engaged in a certain kind of combat with the police, although they are extraordinarily unreliable and volatile. And so the Black Panther Party raised up the concept of lumpen. And this was something that was influenced by Frantz Fanon, who was an extraordinarily influential revolutionary force who participated in the Algerian Revolution and trying to deal with the shortcomings of Marx's explanation of social forces required for revolutions, saw the tremendous limitations that were to be discovered in the traditional working class as defined by Marx and et cetera. So anyway, the Black Panther Party provided the closest thing to a revolutionary center with all of its limitations, that our movement had ever expressed, and although incorrect on some essentials, introduced the question of class struggle to our movement that became briefly generalized within a large sector of the Black working class itself. And I think I want to mention about the Black Panther Party that was also really important is that when it talked about the working class, or when it organized the African working class, or perhaps this was part of the problem with the Black Panther Party in terms of its recognition that when the working class was more than Africans who were connected to labor unions. This is something that some people of the 1960s, activists and militants, were not able to understand, because the Panthers were not renowned for work within trade unions and things like that. On the one hand, while there were some Africans, particularly in the Detroit area, who made incredible struggles and within the trade union movement, attempting to give it a revolutionary character. And so those people, but the fact of the matter is that much of this is based on a misdirected kind of understanding in terms of the assumption that the fundamental contradictions in what they have described as capitalist society, and I think it's true about capitalist society, aspects of it existed at the point of production, where the value of the labor of the worker is stolen at the point of production, where the worker is engaged in production. This is essentially industrial production. But that misses the point, because we only get to the point of production in the factories, and at the moment when so much exploitation has occurred in the colony, that's bringing all the resources to the point of production. And so the fact is that the primary contradiction for the colonized is not at the point of production, at the point of the bayonet. The oppression of the colonizer in stealing our resources and stealing our lives itself, that set the whole thing in motion. So anyway, this was something that's really important, has been important, understand, has never been clearly understood within the overall movement, and something that we are involved in and have been involved in a very long time, of introducing into any analysis of the contradictions that we find in modern society today. And these are contradictions born of a colonial mode of production. So the parties of the white ruling class within the United States are certainly the most significant parties, are the Democratic and Republican parties. The objective of the Democratic and Republican parties is the perpetuation of the capitalist social system, which rests upon the foundation of African oppression. Although both of them are capable of prattle about democracy, the democracy they talk about is only a description of the form assumed by organs of coercion. That is to say, police, army, courts, etc., the state in exercising capitalist rule. And we say that the Democratic and Republican parties are the parties of the white ruling class within the United States. And that's true in terms of directly being the case. But the fact is that indirectly, when we have the political activity concentrated on this pedestal, on the platform of colonial oppression, indirectly they are serving the capitalist system, the colonial capitalist system, because what they're doing is diverting the struggle that should be made against colonialism and the colonial mode of production. They are diverting that struggle and maintaining that struggle as something that functions on the base of colonialism, allowing colonialism to go untouched. This is one of the big differences and contradictions that has existed historically between the colonized African and other people and the colonizer, leftist, communist, and whatever you want to call them. So the objective of the Democratic and Republican parties is a perpetuation of the capitalist social system, which rests upon the foundation of African oppression. Although both of them are capable of prattle about democracy, the democracy they talk about is a description of the form assumed by organs of coercion, police, army, courts, etc., the state in exercising capitalist rule. So neither the Democratic or Republican Party is capable of talking about overthrowing the capitalist social system itself, whether its form is democratic, openly dictatorial, or monarchist, thus allowing for genuine socialist democracy with ownership and authority in the hands of the working class majority. Moreover, for all their prattle about democracy, neither party will ever be able to bring about the democratic self-determination of the broad mass of African people, precisely because the capitalist social system within the nation-state boundaries of the US, perhaps more than any place else, rests upon a foundation of African oppression going back to the days of what is called slavery. However, the Democratic and Republican parties have been excellent tools of the white ruling class, precisely because they have appeared to give the exploited workers and oppressed peoples a choice, precisely because they have appeared to provide the exploited workers and oppressed peoples alternatives and freedom of democratic participation in the political life of the US nation state. The Republican and Democratic parties have been excellent political tools of the white ruling class precisely because they have allowed the white ruling class to monopolize political, economic, and ideological power over the mass of workers and oppressed peoples while obscuring the class interests which are served by the Republican and Democratic parties. Hence, they exploited workers and oppressed peoples. Hence they exploited workers and oppressed peoples who, like sectors of the bourgeoisie, are often ignorant of their class interests, are usually found attempting to pursue their interests within the parties of the capitalist, colonialist ruling class. And even colonized African communists and nationalists have missed this very important point and concentrated significant aspects of their attention and interest fighting shadows of colonial capitalism as represented in the colonial parties of the ruling class. I mean, so much time goes on talking about the betrayal of the masses by the Black congressional, whatever the thing is called now, et cetera, as though, there's a solution ultimately that will be found within the Democratic Republican parties. So within the US and most capitalist countries, there are generally, but not always, more than one capitalist party. Within the US, this allows the bourgeoisie to wear two hats and to assume the good cop, bad cop routine. In this way, the bourgeois social system protects itself by passing political power to one bourgeois party when the other has come into disrepute with the people. I mean, you look at the situation in the United States at this time, where some of the more recent polling numbers I've seen indicate that the leaders of the Republican and the party and the Democratic Party have support somewhere around the low to mid 30s and perhaps 40 percentile, and which shows a mass of people do not find either of these parties something that represents their particular interest, but the only alternatives people have within the system itself is one or the other. And both of them, both expressions of colonial white power, political expression in terms of the Democratic and Republican Party, support this notion that this is the only way the question of power can be resolved. And this is supported by other elements, petty bourgeois and other elements, who talk about third partyism as though a third party that is not involved in trying to overturn the social system is a solution. In other words, they would say that the solution is not in overturning the colonial mode of production, but being able to more effectively function on the base of the colonial domination of African and other peoples around the world. So the fact that people can vote one or the other bourgeois party in and out of power, this is bourgeois democracy, gives the impression of political free will by the masses and acts as a social pressure relief valve of blunting the development of class struggle. Actually, the people have not exercised free will, which presupposes information and science. Freedom is the recognition of necessity, which is prerequisite to exercising free will. Within the United States and other places where more than one capitalist party dominates and the political life of the people, elections are means of nonviolent struggle by different sectors of the ruling class for control of the state. Therefore, as opposed to different social forces organized into their own independent class organizations and engaged in conscious class struggle one against the other, the two-party system within the US mobilizes the various class and national forces into the service of one sector of the capitalist colonial class engaged in intra-class struggle with another. The two-party system obscures the class interests of the exploited workers and oppressed peoples, and reduces the people into reserve forces of one sector of the bourgeoisie or another. The question of class struggle within the US has always been difficult enough, even without the two-party duplicity of the bourgeoisie. This has to do with the parasitic nature of the capitalist system. Within the US, this parasitism stems from a social system built on stolen land, the massacre of hundreds of thousands of native people, and the enslavement of African people. Hence, all social forces or classes which have benefited from the development of the so-called New World, which have found general happiness and freedom from political oppression and material want, have done so at the expense of the life, liberty, and development of Native and African peoples. Hence, a material economic basis for the political unity existing between the US North American bourgeoisie and the US North American white working class. It is a political unity directed against the African and Native peoples in defense of the capitalist social system, hence the parasitic nature of the capitalist system. The parasitic nature of the capitalist system is the basis for the political and ideological leadership of the modern US-based African proletariat. It is the only social force which has the exact combination of qualities which makes it an absolute volatile opponent of the capitalist social system. Along with the native people, the oppression of the African people represents the foundation upon which the capitalist social system rests. The 19th century philosopher Karl Marx termed this economic relationship primitive accumulation, and accumulation not the result of the capitalist mode of production, but a starting point. The African population exists as a domestic colony upon which the US capitalist system was founded. Not only is the Black population a colonial population within the belly of the US, a factor with explosive social connotations in and of itself, the African population is also essentially working class in social composition. Estimates of the working class composition of the Black population range from 88 to 94%. Moreover, the ideological foundation of US and world capitalism has its basis, the ideological foundation of US and world capitalism has as its basis the material foundation of US and world capitalism. Racism or white nationalism, the ideological foundation of US and world capitalism led by US capitalism, has as its basis primitive accumulation, the material foundation of the US and world capitalist social system. That is to say, the ideas, the ideological basis rest upon this material reality. The class struggle against the capitalist colonialist social system is centered in the colonized African population within the United States. The colonized African population within the US constitutes the true proletariat, the working class that through its own experience in life has come to understand that the bourgeois parties are opposed to the interests of the Black working people. When the Black working class was organized into its own party in the 60s, when the Black Panther Party was a legitimate representative of the Black working class, the Black working class presented such a formidable opponent to the US capitalist social system that the chief of the secret political arm of the bourgeois state declared the Black Panther Party the greatest threat to the internal security of the United States since the Civil War. When the Black working class was organized into its own party in the 60s, with its class and national interests summed up in the form of a political program opposed to bourgeois rule, the Democratic and Republican parties had to call into force the repressive arms of the capitalist colonial state. The Democratic and Republican parties of the bourgeoisie were incapable of engaging in successful ideological and nonviolent political struggle with the African working class. And the truth of the matter is that continues to be the case, which is one of the reasons that the bourgeoisie does everything it can to make sure that the ideas of the African working class, revolutionary African working class, the advanced attachment of the African working class never can reach the masses of Africans and other people without the greatest difficulty. This is the basis of shadow banning and the various sectors of the state bourgeois media, whether it's social media or whether it's newspapers and things like that, limiting the ability of the African working class to be heard. Even sectors of the white petty bourgeois left does everything it can to mute discussion coming from the African working class. And so it cannot contend ideologically and politically with us. And so it took an all-out urban war against the Black working class in the 60s for a reachievement of capitalist class peace. And the current facade of a two-party system representing the class interests of all the people, the facade. And in fact, this is what July 29th, the attack on the African People's Socialist Party was all about. They cannot contend ideologically and politically in a debate with us, and especially with us as we exist as an international party stretched across the globe. Africans organized as a single nation, associated with and aligned with other colonized peoples around the world, with a meaningful sector of the colonizer population under our leadership, functioning as a kind of a new front, a second front in the struggle, behind, giving us the base behind enemy lines. So this war saw the Black workers stand up alone against armed regular police organizations, as well as this is the 1960s, as well as the armed forces usually reserved for U.S. foreign policy intervention. In Detroit, this included the 82nd Airborne Division, and in urban areas throughout the United States, military tanks and an assortment of other sophisticated military armaments were deployed against the unarmed Black working class communities. And people who hear about such things as 1033 and how the military, United States Pentagon is feeding military weapons to police departments around this country miss the point. Yeah, they do that. And yeah, at different times they disguise what it is they are doing. But we saw it openly done in the 1960s, where they brought out tanks with esoteric names and things like that, and used them within the United States against the African population. And as we mentioned, they pulled back military forces who were fighting to maintain colonial domination of the people in Vietnam, brought them into Detroit and other places to crush the African Revolution as it expressed itself within the United States. And so in addition to the immediate task of putting down a massive movement with insurrectionary characteristics similar to that presently occurring, this is 1985, in occupied Tanzania, South Africa, the military offensive of the capitalist colonialist ruling class, directed by the Democratic and Republican parties on various levels, was designed to destroy the class organization of the Black working class, to destroy the independent Black working class organizations, and particularly to destroy the Black Panther Party. The US ruling class used its military power, its state power, to crush the independent revolutionary capacity of the Black working class, the only social force which made it necessary to defend the capitalist social system, the only social force which was capable of challenging the bourgeoisie for power, the fundamental question for any revolution. For most of the 16 years subsequent to the military defeat of the Black Revolution of the 60s, this is written in 1985, the bourgeoisie has experienced a tremendous amount of energy and resources to keep the Black working class politically disoriented and disorganized, unable to come together organizationally in its own interests. The methods for this have ranged from open white ruling class bribery of non-proletarian social forces to naked terror against the Black working class itself. Evidence of the Black working class in popular culture has nearly disappeared. Michael Jackson, Jesse Jackson, Prince, and Lionel Richie have become the stereotypes of the acceptable African within the US. On the occasions when Black working class elements are allowed to emerge as acceptable, it is as followers of Jesse Jackson to the Democratic Party, or as fictionalized, pathetic, poor Black working class children who make it out of capitalist colonialist poverty through being adopted by well-to-do white petty bourgeois colonial families. A significant sector of the liberal Black petty bourgeoisie accepted neo-colonial roles in the bourgeois Democratic Party as payoff in material resources and prestige for administering the Black working class in areas where white direct colonial rule would be unacceptable to the Black working class masses. While the Jesse Jackson presidential campaign was the highest expression of this manifestation, the bombing of a Black working class community in Philadelphia by a Black mayor and a Black city manager was the sharpest expression of the political significance of this manifestation. The white women's and homosexual movements have become virtual scabs on the Black revolution, offering themselves up for part of the booty of parasitic capitalism, demanding and receiving favors and privileges as their price for class peace under capitalism. Not only are these movements incapable of raising up and supporting the Black liberation movement, which is the quintessence of the class struggle within the US, they are also absolutely incapable of raising the question of women's oppression within the context of class, the only way such oppression will ever be overcome. The Black petty bourgeoisie, neo-colonialist puppets, and the women's and homosexual movements are conscious opportunist movements, which offer up the battered carcass of the collective Black working class to the altar of capitalism as offerings of class peace for the privileges for themselves as anti-proletariat social forces. They all attempt to mute and obscure class struggle and call on the people to join the Democratic Party to achieve their aims. This is the general condition that the Black working class has been struggling to overcome for the last 16 years. With the defeat of the Black Revolution of the 60s, our independent working class organizations were destroyed, and the mass of Black workers disorganized and dispersed. A variety of petty bourgeois social forces, mostly tied to the Democratic Party, has united with the white ruling class in assuring class peace. This means the muting of class struggle, which has the interests of the Black working class as a center. It is within this context that the existence and struggle of the African People's Socialist Party achieved significance. Organized in 1972, from surviving Black working class organizations of the 60s, the African People's Socialist Party has been striving to pull the best elements of the class back together under our defeat of the 60s. While we are a revolutionary party, we understand that our task for the period is not to make the revolution, but to build the revolutionary capacity of the only consistently revolutionary social force within the United States borders, the Black working class. This means that our primary task is to build the African People's Socialist Party itself. However, having said this, we must also talk about our strategy for building a truly revolutionary working class party. This is necessary because at least one petty bourgeois US-based African organization claims party building as its main task. This party does this in a fashion which does not distinguish its main task from its general aim. Hence, the task of party building has for all practical purposes become its general aim. And the slogan of party building is used to obscure class struggle, to maintain the class peace, which is necessary for successful bourgeois colonialist rule. For the African People's Socialist Party, fundamental to the task of party building is the need to smash the class peace. Otherwise, sectors of the Black working class might remain ensconced within the Democratic Party of the bourgeoisie. Otherwise, those African workers who have turned their backs on the two parties of the bourgeois colonialists will be unable to see that it's not enough to turn our backs on the bourgeoisie, but we must join and support our own independent parties in order to achieve our own separate class interests. Therefore, for the African People's Socialist Party, the task of party building is always of a process which is deeply rooted in solving the concrete, that is to say, practical problems of a revolution for the period. Obviously, one of these problems, indeed a key, even fundamental problem, is the reorganization of the Black working class into its own independent revolutionary party. Thus, we are not talking about the task of party building for its own sake. For the task of party building is for the purpose of solving the most fundamental problems of the revolution. Nor is this simply a play on words. We are informed of the practical problems of the revolution by our ability to sum up the period in which we live and assume the task of party building. Such a summation informs us that objective conditions for revolution are ripe. The U.S. capitalist colonialist class is engaged in several undeclared wars, in pursuit of which the ruling class is itself divided. Now, I remind us that this is something that was written in 1985. The conditions of existence for the Black working class is reaching new, even higher levels of desperation. And the use of overt police terror against the colonially oppressed Black workers is becoming more blatant every day. The general crisis of imperialism, of which the above are evidence, and which the election of Ronald Wilson Reagan as US president was designed to confront, continues unabated nationally and internationally. And I might mention in 1985, Ronald Wilson Reagan in many ways was the Donald Trump of that moment, who was elected by a majority white people for the purpose of solving the crisis that was being made manifest by the struggles against colonialism around the world as Trump. However, it is in the area of subjective forces where the revolutionary prospects are weak. Key to this weakness is the general state of disorganization of the Black working class. This state of disorganization is facilitated by opportunism on every level, by so-called revolutionary parties which are fearful of class struggle and Black working class hegemony over our own movement, by silver-tongued bourgeois-sponsored neo-colonial Black petty bourgeois stooges whose prestige, appearance of power, and material resources are dependent upon their ability to speak for the masses of unorganized Black workers, by the so-called communists and so-called socialists and so-called leftists of all stripes, who can wear such appellations only for so long as the Black working class is voiceless and cannot impress our own version of class truth upon the political life of the US nation state, by the women's and homosexual movements, and by every social force which remembers the undiluted power of the Black revolution of the 60s with the same fear and trepidation as the US bourgeoisie in whose interests they faithfully serve. Therefore, in practical terms, party building means first and foremost concrete work designed to activate the best of the class into political motion around concrete programs with the immediate aim of achieving absolute political hegemony over our movement and class in the process. Let me say this again. Therefore, in practical terms, party building means first and foremost concrete work designed to activate the best of the class into political motion around concrete programs with the immediate aim of achieving absolute political hegemony over our movement and class in the process. Therefore, party building means providing leadership for the class even when the party is small and has not yet fully achieved this desired capacity. For example, although a small party, the African People's Socialist Party, has been able to ignite a movement in Oakland, California, which is daily achieving a social character. This movement, with the party at its center, has been able to mobilize social forces of various nationalities into the service of the Black working class and away from absolute unity with bourgeois colonialists. Among the forces mobilized by the party are elements of the Black working class, who, although not in the party, are capable, due to the party's leadership, of enhancing their organized fighting capacity around real, concrete social needs. This movement has successfully challenged the basic assumptions of bourgeois property relations And for the first time since the 60s, has put the bourgeoisie on the political defensive in a struggle with the Black working class. In addition, the African People's Socialist Party was able to put an initiative on the electoral ballot in Oakland, which won 25,000 votes, which was 20% of the total cast. Thus, a small party in the process of party building was able to provide leadership for African and other working class elements, which is greatly disproportionate to our physical size. But more than this, the voters who were wound to a working class stance in that election had to go against the leadership of the bourgeois colonialist parties with whom they are registered. Listen, we can go back to the thing that troubles the United States government so much. One of the things, the elections that we participated in 2017, 2019 in St. Petersburg, Florida. And of course, we wreaked havoc here in St. Louis when we participated in the electoral process, putting forth an anti-colonial project through the election as well. So the party building process must awaken the Black working class to practical participation in its own political life. Hence, concrete struggle, real practical leadership of the class is a must, even when building the party. But all concrete practical participation will not be within the party itself. The party must be capable of mobilizing and leading the various social forces of various nationalities into strategic motion if it is to be worthy of the name party. Therefore, even when we are confronted with a period such as today, when the last significant political lessons to be summed up by the Black working class is military defeat, and although obviously restless, the masses of Black workers have not yet concluded that their own interests are summed up and concretized in the party, are worth the risk of life and liberty as suggested by membership in the party, Black workers must still have the leadership of the party available to them and must still be able to claim the party as their own. The African People's Socialist Party is engaged in a party building process, and we think the people should have some idea of what that means. The Black working class and our allies should have some idea of what parties are and what it is they do, what their functions are. We think our supporters should have a better grip on what it is you support and whether your support is what it needs to be. In the first place, we are a revolutionary Black working class party, the only such party in the US. We are organized together around a common general program and policies, which were arrived at during our first party Congress, which is the highest organization of the party and is comprised of representatives of the entire membership. Our general program and our policies are the practical, concrete representatives of our revolutionary theory of African internationalism. And here's where we say that African internationalism is Pan-Africanism developed to its highest stage, Pan-Africanism during the age of imperialism, Pan-Africanism which united the African workers of the world in a revolutionary process in unity with revolutionary aspirations of all the workers of the world. Obviously, that is not Pan-Africanism, that's African internationalism. The theory of African internationalism is ever developing with the new experiences of the international working class, African and otherwise. It is based on a scientific method of investigating and analyzing social life and the particular characteristics its development has characterized for African people whose current oppressive circumstances have their basis in the slave trade, which was a fundamental feature in the development of world capitalism, which is to say colonialism. The scientific method of investigating social life employed by the African People's Socialist Party is called dialectical and historical materialism. By dialectical, we mean that our approach to the investigation of all phenomena is all-sided, considering past and present, and the relations of phenomena in motion to all other phenomena, even as phenomena comes into being and dies out of existence. By materialism, we mean that our analysis, our interpretation of phenomena, receives its information from the investigation of the phenomena itself, that it does not acquire an explanation of phenomena outside the phenomena. By historical materialism, we mean the application of the principles of dialectical materialism to the investigation and interpretation of social life. And so a basic point that we want to make is that you can't understand anything, social life or anything as static. That the fact is that emotion is a condition for the existence of anything at all, any social phenomenon. And so something is always dying out and something is always being born. That's extremely important to understand. Otherwise, we can see what exists as something that has to be permanent will always be there. And everything that is dying out and coming into existence does so in relationship to all other phenomena surrounding it, and is impacted by that, and it impacts on that. And that's really important for us to understand. And when we look to understand the world, we understand the world by examining the world, not the Bible. We understand the world by examining the world itself, by not something outside of the world. And that's the thing, what we refer to that as materialism. We want to understand the world, we examine the world. And what's offered us is something that obscures the world and would have us understanding, something else. So the opposition of the African People's Socialist Party to the US government and the capitalist social system, which rests on our colonial oppression, is total and absolute. There are no circumstances under which we would ever find the foreign domination of our people or the economic exploitation of our class acceptable. We are convinced that capitalism, the social system built off the slave trade and the theft of life, liberty, and resources of non-European peoples of the world, well, the world's resources are concentrated in Europe and the US and are owned and controlled by a minority of non-working capitalists, is on its deathbed. We believe that the future belongs to the dispossessed workers of the world, who, when armed with a revolutionary theory and led by a revolutionary party, represent the conscious subjective forces of history necessary for the overthrow of capitalism and the advent of a new social system organized under the leadership of the working masses, the real producers of all material wealth. This new social system will end production for profit and ruled by a non-working minority whose private ownership and control of the means of production guarantees such authority. We believe that the new social system, which will follow capitalism, one, the white ruling class and its hangers-on attempt to suppress with the oppression of the Black working class, is communism, a social system which demands labor according to ability and guarantees the material resources of life and its reproduction according to the needs. Thus, we recognize that the African People's Socialist Party, the advanced conscious detachment of the Black working class, is like the class itself locked in a life and death battle with the US capitalist social system. Hence, the members of our party must represent the advanced sector of the Black working class. They must constantly strive for a discipline that is steeled by conviction and that is self-induced. As the advanced attachment of the Black working class, the African People's Socialist Party assumes the responsibility for advancing the cause of the whole class, which at any given time may be battered by ignorance, drug addiction, alcoholism, demoralization, etc. Hence, the members of the African People's Socialist Party must become professional revolutionaries, individuals whose real profession is revolution and whose vehicle for carrying out their profession is the African People's Socialist Party, the organization of professional revolutionaries. The African People's Socialist Party recognizes that the colonially oppressed African workers are the most consistently revolutionary social force within the US, but that the African working class will not achieve revolutionary working class consciousness on its own accord. That alone, the African working class will at best achieve nationalist consciousness. Therefore, it is the task of the African People's Socialist Party, even as it is being developed to full capacity, to intervene in the day-to-day struggles of the African working class, to forge deep lines in struggle and to lead the class to an ever higher, ever closer understanding of African internationalism, the science of Black workers' revolution. And such a party as the African People's Socialist Party, a revolutionary African internationalist party based on a revolutionary working class theory, a party of professional revolutionaries. All distinctions between workers and intellectuals, laborer and professional, lose their significance as we are welded into one by the common cause of a proletarian future that is being advanced by the party of the colonially oppressed African working class. On one side stands bourgeoisie and all the institutions which serve to preserve its rule. On the other side stands the international working class and the party of its most advanced representatives. the African People's Socialist Party. Together, these two social forces represent the great contest of our days. Separately, they represent the past and the future. The conscious representatives of these two great social forces are choosing sides. Every day makes such a choice by the Black working class and our allies a critical choice. The bourgeoisie will not explain the relationship of political parties to class struggle in the manner we have just done. Most of the so-called revolutionary parties are incapable of doing so. But for us, the matter is clear. The future will prevail. The urgent matter is for all those who have thought they have enjoyed a neutral seat as spectators in this contest to take up the call, to take the great leap forward and grab the future in your hands to help shape and mold it in this lifetime for this generation. Those who can must join the African People's Socialist Party. Those who cannot must support us. Build a revolutionary party of the African working class. Build the African People's Socialist Party. Uhuru.
Uhuru, Chairman Uhuru, wow, I just really want to salute just your brilliant leadership and appreciate you introducing this study to us today. Again, wanting to say that it was originally published in 1985 and the relevance that it bears today, these understandings that we have to leave with in 2022, and also just how this document continues to contextualize the attacks that were made against us by the US government in the form of the FBI on July 29th. This is just another example of the long history that you have in developing the theoretical understandings and worldview that is African internationalism, which we see is influencing every major question circulating throughout the world today. It is truly profound. And so we're going to take a brief pause here before going into Q&A, which we do have some great questions, Chairman, lined up, and I hope to get to most of them. But we're going to take a break for our announcements. But while we do this, comrades, please take this opportunity, especially if you're just joining us and being part of the effort to popularize these teachings, like and comment and share widely. So let's take a look at the announcements, starting with the Hands Off Uhuru, Hands Off Africa campaign video.
This is the FBI. You have a federal warrant for this address. Keep your hands up and follow orders. This is the FBI. We have a warrant for...
They handcuffed me and my wife out here. They wanted me to sit on the curb while they were carrying this out. Something that I refused to do. They wanted my wife to sit on the curb out here, that she refused to do.
As I was coming out, this big old drone met me.
The only revolutionary organization that's done something here on the ground practically for African people is the one that's come under attack. Institution that offers a community radio station, a newspaper, a commercial kitchen, an Aquaba Hall rental space, and community office for our organizers. That was the building that has come under attack.
Need a breach? What do you need?
Need one.
I don't know.
I told Ben that money.
I'll
Thank you.
we will build a movement of white people that says hands off the Uhuru movement.
They see in the African People's Socialist Party a vanguard for the struggle for the liberation of our people. They see that because not just what we do here in the United States, but because we had the temerity to do like Garvey, to do like Malcolm X, and take the struggle of black people around the world.
Uhuru. So that was, again, the campaign video for the Hands Off Uhuru, Hands Off Africa. And you can learn more about how to be involved in that mass campaign and what role that you can play by visiting handsoffuhuru.org. So continuing on this, join the counteroffensive to stop the FBI attacks on the African People's Socialist Party and the African liberation struggle. Donate or volunteer to the Hands Off Uhuru, Hands Off Africa Defense Campaign today. And for more information, as just mentioned, go to handsoffuhuru.org to volunteer, donate, or sign the petition to demand Hands Off Uhuru, Hands Off Africa. Take the petition out into your community, spread that far and wide. Join the Reparations Legacy Project this Giving Tuesday for the 4th annual 24-hour reparations telethon featuring leaders, members, volunteers, and culture friends and supporters of the worldwide Uhuru movement. The telethon will be live on air starting Tuesday, November 29th at 7 a.m. Central Time until Wednesday, November 30th, 7 a.m. Central Time. This year, the Reparations Legacy Project, a campaign of the Uhuru Solidarity Movement under the leadership of the African People's Socialist Party, will be collaborating with Uhuru Furniture and Collectibles and the African People's Education and Defense Fund, APEDF, to build support for the Black Power Blueprint's latest project, Uhuru Wakulea, Freedom to Nurture, African Women's Health Center in St. Louis, Missouri. This year, we will be raising the rest of the funds needed to build this health center in North St. Louis, which will be the home of the already in progress African Doula Project. To register for updates and the program info, you can do so at tinyurl.com/reparations telethon Tuesday. Make sure you like and subscribe to the Burning Spear TV on YouTube to catch every episode of the Omali Taught Me Sunday Study, and support the Omali Taught Me show by donating now at paypal.me/Omali Taught Me. And 2023 is right around the corner, and Uhuru Tours and Speakers Bureau is calling on you, an institution of the African People's Socialist Party that coordinates events and tours for Chairman Omali Yeshitela and other party speakers and leaders, to book Chairman Omali and other Uhuru movement speakers for your campus or organization now. You can email info@uhurutours.com or call 727-914-3621. So go ahead. Again, 2023 is around the corner. Book Chairman Omali Yeshitela to come speak at your campus, your organization, and other party leaders and speakers as well. And finally, you can learn more about the events of the Uhuru movement, what's going on, by going to theburningspear.com/events page. And I just want to reiterate the call that was made in this document that we just studied, that you must join the African People's Socialist Party. If you can't join the African People's Socialist Party, you must support the African People's Socialist Party. But for those who want to join, who have heard the call today, the significance of an organization such as the African People's Socialist Party, which is the vehicle to lead this struggle to its successful conclusion, then go to APSP.uhuru.org, fill out that contact form, that join form, so that you can get in the process of joining the African People's Socialist Party. So again, that's APSP.uhuru.org. So we're going to go into questions from our audience, Chairman, and of course want to acknowledge where people are watching from. Let me get you back on with me. Let's see. Okay, so want to make sure that we acknowledge where people are tuning in from. We have Canada, Oakland, California, Minneapolis, Minnesota, St. Louis, Missouri. In South Africa or occupied Tanzania, we have comrades tuning in from Mpumalanga and Folkville. We have Portland, Oregon, Greenville, South Carolina, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, St. Petersburg, Florida, London, Boston, Massachusetts, Chicago, Illinois, Battle Creek, Michigan, Moorhead, Minnesota, Fort Myers, Florida, Frederick, Maryland, Huntsville, Alabama, Fresno, California, California, Lungi, Sierra Leone, San Diego, California, and Namibia. So Uhuru comrades, thank you for tuning in. And Chairman, we're going to go ahead right into the questions. Again, we've got some outstanding ones. So this first question comes from Comrade Diop. Says, Uhuru Chairman, I remember in 2004 when Bush and Gore ran against each other for US presidency. The party made a very astute criticism of Gore and his failure to criticize the system for disenfranchisement of African voters for the sake of protecting the overall system. Rather than expose Bush's theft of Black votes in states like Florida, Gore conceded to Bush. Is this an example of contending sectors of the white ruling class being united around the interests of the colonial capitalist system as a whole?
Comrade Diop, you continue to amaze me. The fact is that you would pull that from a 2004 observation that I made. And you do that with some frequency in terms of obviously studying some of the things that I've written and stated. But yeah, that's a splendid example, Comrade Diop, how the role of the capitalist parties, of course, is to protect the colonial capitalist system itself, and also to protect their own leadership, their own hegemony in that process, but they will sacrifice their own leadership if necessary to protect the system. And when we talk about is Gore could very well have raised the question of the United States violation of that election by denying African people the theft of African votes as violation of an assault on the so-called 1965 Voting Rights Act. They did that. They took that away, and Gore did not even raise that criticism. And as he was talking about the issue of African people whose vote was clearly stolen there, never reached the surface, because that would have been to introduce the anti-colonial question into that discussion, and to expose the fact that the system survives and is successful only as a consequence of attacking the masses of African people and the African working class. And yeah, Gore made that concession, and that's exactly what we're looking at. And that's why it's so problematic. By the way, there's been an ongoing move to erode even the significance of the so-called Voting Rights Act of 1965, as subsequent to that 2004 election that we're talking about. So yeah, I think that's pretty astute, Comrade Diop. Yes, Uhuru.
Uhuru Chairman, thank you. And thank you, Comrade Diop, for that question. Let's go now to Comrade Paul, tuning in with us via Zoom. Asks, so Chairman, just to clarify again, you are saying the Panthers wanted the lumpen, the non-working class element, to have some kind of leadership role in the revolution?
I'm saying that the Panthers defined the lumpen as a critical social force to make the revolution. And a lot of that was influenced by Eldridge Cleaver, but also it was the influence of Fanon, who, because we've always been involved in this struggle to try and make sense of the notion of what kind of social forces were necessary for revolution, based on the fact that what was clear to us is what the Marxists were saying, which was applicable, it seemed, to Europe, did not apply to our reality. And so Fanon was one of the persons who put forth the whole notion of the lumpen being such a critical force. And the Black Panther Party also took that up. And somebody noted in the chat, I see, that the fact is that African people were not the lumpen as characterized as experienced and developed in Europe. It wasn't that people, quote unquote, wouldn't work, as the colonial mode of production made all kinds of decisions that kept broad masses of African people out of production at any given time. That was part of what colonialism was about. It was to liquidate the capacity of self-interest production by the colonized, and so that only production that would occur would be that which would be profitable, meaningful, that serve the interests of the colonizer. And so that's how African people got into this situation of not working. But nevertheless, it had something to do with a certain kind of consciousness that would evolve. And long term, having the long view, being able to have the long view, that's always been connected to people's relationship to production. And, you know, you can see that just in terms of how the cycle of production itself, it requires being able to anticipate a future. That's not true when you're not involved in production, so that peasants in Africa too often now are only peasants in name only, that we don't grow food anymore. The colonizer has minimized our capacity for growing our own food and sends these trucks in with people wearing blue helmets that throw bleached flour to starving masses of people. That impacts on how people can even imagine and envision like a future. So anyway, I think that's part of what it is that we are talking about and looking at, Uhuru.
Uhuru, thank you, Chairman. And also thank you, Comrade Paul, who is in the chat section on Zoom saying, thank you, Chairman, much appreciated. So this next question is coming from Comrade Norman Jalali Richmond in Canada. And Chairman asks, can you discuss the difference between a vanguard and a mass party? V.I. Lenin called for a vanguard and Kwame talked about a mass party. What are the thoughts? I think that's like a second question. So that first question.
Which Kwame are you talking about? Talked about a mass party.
Oh, that's a good.
That's, you know, I mean, I don't know if he means Touré or if he means Nkrumah, but the basic point is that Lenin's notion of what a political party should be, it defied how the liberals of Europe understood how political struggles could occur, and how the working people could come to power. And Lenin understood this issue of the state and repression and the instruments of maintaining power that were created by the ruling class, and that this was not something that was going to be won easily. He built a party based on the secret police, the attacks by the secret police on revolutionary organization, the arrests, assassinations, jailings of revolutionaries everywhere. And it revolved around certain kinds of principles in terms of recognition of the need for some forces whose profession was revolution, who wasn't just making revolution on their off days when they had nothing to do, when, you know, there was no baseball game, they had to take the children to something like that. That there must be an organization of professionals that had to go up against the most brutal, repressive kind of social system, while much of Europe, so-called European communists, somehow convinced themselves in the basic democracy of the bourgeoisie. And many people subsequently, some people subsequent to the development of the Bolshevik Party under Lenin have said that, well, Russia was distinctly different from the rest of Europe because there was no democracy in Russia, because it was a semi-feudal kind of state. But colonialism, you can't find a more brutal reality than colonialism. And how it imposed the colonial dictatorship over masses of our people that exists even to now, where people can't even travel often from neighborhood to neighborhood, town to town, without going through these roadblocks set up by elements of the neo-colonial state and what have you. So that's the kind of party that we need. And the party we need has to have the ability to lead masses of people, but the advanced attachment, the vanguard, that sector that organization of professional revolutionaries have to lead everything. That's what the African People's Socialist Party is. But the African People's Socialist Party gets involved in mass work. We build mass organizations. We do that all the time. We just don't get confused about how revolution will be achieved, about how the liberation of our people will be achieved. So that's my response to that comment, Norman. Thank you. Uhuru.
Uhuru, Chairman, thank you. And Comrade Jalali did clarify Kwame Nkrumah.
Okay.
Uhuru. Thank you, Comrade Jalali. So this next question comes from a different Kwame, Comrade Kwame on YouTube. Says, what are the chairman's thoughts on the Lowndes County Black Panther Party? It would be interesting to see an analysis between the Lowndes County Black Panther Party and the later formed Black Panther Party, how these different formations furthered the goal of Black liberation from different directions.
Lowndes County was extremely important. That's the Lowndes County Freedom Organization that came to be known as the Black Panther Party because it used a symbol. And the Lowndes County Freedom Organization came into existence after work being done a lot by SNCC and some other forces trying to participate essentially initially in the Democratic Party. We know, Fannie Lou Hamer, we know the people who were murdered and what have you, just for trying to join the Democratic Party. And we know the double cross that was done by the white liberals to the African movement, including the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party that came together in 1964 to contest with the regular Mississippi white Democrats, this lynch mob Democratic Party. And so this betrayal is what led members of SNCC in particular to walk out of the Democratic National Convention in 1964, and sectors went into Alabama to organize what came to be known as the Lowndes County Freedom Organization that would be characterized as the Black Panther Party because they used the Black Panther as a symbol for the Lowndes County Freedom Organization. It was a Black political party. It was made no attempts to become a part of the Democratic Party, anything like it's going to be an independent Black political party. So that was a great movement forward. That was a certain kind of development that we saw happening inside our movement. And this is the organization from whence the Black Panther Party took its name and took probably was inspired by the activity. In fact, this was a SNCC organization, and in St. Petersburg, Florida, we were SNCC in the office that we marched out of in December of 1966 to where that mural was snatched down was the Black Panther office. And that was because SNCC people, many of us characterized ourselves as Black Panthers. And that was before the founding of the Black Panther Party that people have become familiar with, associated with Huey P. Newton in particular. So it was a really important part of the overall development of our struggle, achieving clarity and moving toward breaking free, achieving independence from the Democratic Party of the colonial bourgeoisie. I hope I spoke to what the comrade was raising. Who was that?
This was
Paul? No, who was that?
Comrade Kwame. That's
Kwame. Yeah.
Uhuru. Thank you, Chairman. All right. Next question comes from Comrade Arthur in Fresno, California. Asks, does the change in the means of production, say from manufacturing-based to a technology-based, change the struggle? For instance, how does tech jobs contribute to colonial production? Basically, how do we keep the African worker relevant in the changing times while we work towards revolution? A major theme among the, it says African American, but Africans in America, a major concept right now is generating generational wealth. And Arthur says he promotes vocational training at the moment for the acquisition of wealth as well. But
let me just say that this whole issue of vocational training, you can go back to Garvey and the one who influenced Garvey very much, Booker T. Washington, I think I'm thinking of, and the whole notion of being capable. The fact is, at the end of legal and formal slavery in the United States, African people were the only people who really had vocational skills. We were the carpenters, we were the plumbers, we were the ones who built and et cetera. And we were simply pushed out of production subsequent to that and lost those skills. So what clearly it demonstrates to me is that while we may achieve learn how to build houses and how to grow food and do and shoes and things like that, such as what the party does, that it has to be part of an overall process of taking political power ourselves, because just as we had those skills, we were kidnapped in part for the technology that we brought with us. We were the ones who introduced rice farming and how to grow rice and even various other kinds of things that's related to production, health-related things. I mean, inoculations for disease were brought to this country by African people. So we had that, and what we lost that because we lost our capacity to be a self-governing people. And so while we want to re-achieve a capacity in that arena, and we must, that is not the solution. And we cannot see that as the solution. And it is what we see as the solution unless that kind of work, that kind of activity, that kind of projection is not connected to an active, dynamic process of projecting independence and taking our own power over our own lives, being a self-governing, self-determining people. So I hope that was helpful, Arthur. Uhuru.
Uhuru, Chairman. Thank you, Arthur, for your question. And comrades, we are getting close to the time. There are so many great questions that we've gotten, Chairman. I think we'll be able to take one more before going into closing remarks. And this question is coming from Comrade Jamal in Moorhead, Minnesota. And Chairman, you touched on this throughout just this overall discussion, but wanted to address it. Uhuru, Comrade Chairman, can you speak to the importance of our mass organizations and working groups for Africans who want to support the movement but can't join the party?
I'm sorry, read that again. I was at the same time I was looking at something that Masamela had sent about snake organizer Ron Wilkins, who ended up in Los Angeles. But go ahead.
Okay, Comrade Jamal was asking if you could speak to the importance of our mass organizations and working groups for Africans who want to support the movement but can't join the party.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's a really important question, Comrade Jamal, because the mass organizations are critical. There are people who, for whatever reason, won't be able to join the party, but can be influenced by the party. And we must provide leadership for those mass organizations where it's at all possible. And the mass organizations are important too, because they function as means by which the people learn how to participate in struggle and become more efficient in participating in struggle. And they also function as a reserve force for the African Revolution itself. So it's a mass organization also provides us with people who can be actually will become members of the African People's Socialist Party, the reserve force. They're like people who are in the dugout waiting for their turn at bat. So they are it's a very crucial thing for us to have, and it's a means again by which the party can express its leadership while not undermining its overall capacity as an advanced detachment vanguard. They're extremely important. They keep us connected in critical ways with masses of our people. And as we know, Comrade Jamal, the work that we do in various places, the kinds of institutions that we created couldn't work if masses were not involved in it, if we didn't have the masses who participate, even though they are not members of the African People's Socialist Party. But we also know that their participation in the mass organization is one of the things that helps to prepare them for membership of the party. They are this reserve force that we can always use, that we can recruit from to put into critical places and not so critical places in the African People's Socialist Party. Uhuru.
Uhuru, Chairman, thank you. And thank you, Comrade Jamal, for your question. And Chairman, that reminds me of something you stated, and I hope I don't butcher this quote, about how the party is always bigger than its formal membership through mass organizations and things.
Yeah, and I tried to use an example of that, even with some of the struggles that we had in Oakland, California. That's just one example. And people are astounded, for example, here in St. Louis, and the government is too. We here in such a short period of time, we've got these massive programs and projects, renovating properties and neighborhoods and stuff like that by bringing masses of people into play, even people who never heard of revolution, never heard of much of what it is that we're talking about now, but they can find their material interest in the leadership of the African People's Socialist Party. So that's what we do. And to the extent that we succeed in connecting people to their material interests in that fashion, it gives us an opportunity to win them politically and ideologically to a high level of unity, to become even more active in achieving our self-determination, our freedom. Uhuru.
Uhuru, Chairman. Last point about that, Comrade Matsamela just made a really important comment, said, my cousin signed the Africans Charged Genocide petition and announced on social media, I have formally joined my cousin's movement. Anyway.
Yeah, so that's really important. Yeah. And I'm glad you mentioned that because 130,000 people signed that. That's where the FBI had to take it down. They stole it because they don't want the people to have evidence of their own support of this demand against the United States charging genocide at the United Nations. So they take away your evidence, they take away your reality so that you can't see what you really believe in anymore, doesn't exist anymore. So yeah, thank you, Comrade Matsamela. That's a great point.
Yes. So Uhuru, Chairman and comrades, I want to thank you for your questions. And we're going to now begin wrapping up this incredible Sunday study. I don't know, Chairman, we might have to do like some kind of part two because the questions were really coming in. People have seemed to really just appreciate this analysis provided in this document. But I want to just turn it over to you for some closing remarks before we officially shut this.
Uhuru, thank you very much, Comrade Director. The only thing I want to say is that we did this study because we think it's extremely important. And I'm calling on everybody who's interested in learning how to be an African internationalist, a revolutionary member of the African People's Socialist Party, to stay tuned to indicate that, because I'm going to be doing other kinds of studies, and some of them will not be so public. Because right now we don't have all the time that we want. We need to move as quickly and effectively as possible. That means that we have to provide information and training for the greatest number of people in the shortest amount of time possible. So stay tuned, indicate your interest in participating in this with the assumption that such participation will lead to membership of the African People's Socialist Party. Uhuru.
Uhuru, Chairman. So again, I want to salute this incredible discussion that we've been able to have. And I want to just thank you, Chairman, for your brilliant leadership for over 50 years for this struggle, the theory of African internationalism. And also I want to just thank all of the forces who participate with the Omali Taught Me Show team for helping with the production, the promotions, curriculum, AV, and chat moderation. And I want to thank all of you for tuning in today. Whether you're watching on Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, we're glad to have you on with us. And I want to thank all of our panel, Chairman, and of course, salute your brilliant leadership. So make sure to follow the Chairman on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. As Chairman mentioned, stay tuned for different announcements coming about greater studies, especially for those who are interested in being a member of the African People's Socialist Party. So stay tuned to those platforms. Subscribe to the Burning Spear TV on YouTube to catch every episode of the Omali Taught Me Sunday Study and any political program that we have, webinars and things like that. They are hosted on the Burning Spear TV YouTube page. So make sure, again, you subscribe to that channel so you can get access to all of that. So again, comrades, Uhuru, Vanguard up, and relentless.
Relentless.
Uhuru.
Uhuru.